Welcome to the Personal Finance Professional Podcast from the Personal Finance Society, a place for thought-provoking discussion from the world of financial planning. I'm Christopher Digby, Executive Director at Howden Specialty. In this episode, I'm speaking to some of our new members of our Professional Standards Committee. Joining me today is Cowton, Emeritus Professor at the University of Huddersfield, Diane Maxwell, Independent Consumer Representative, and Neil Freshwater, Group Integration Director at Aviva. They're here to discuss their professional background, the role of the committee, and the value they will bring to the role. Here's my conversation with Chris, Diane and Neil. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today, everyone. We'll start with introducing yourselves and briefly outlining your professional background. Diane, let's start with you.
So yes, as I think you mentioned in your intro, I'm one of the two consumer representatives on the committee, and I suppose consumer advocacy and behavioural economics has been a thread through my career and something I'm quite passionate about. So my background is financial services. That includes banking, financial services regulation, pensions across both industry and government. So private sector, but also quite a bit on public policy. And 6 years on OECD committees working on financial services best practice across, I think it's about 30 countries on those committees. So that's a very brief intro, but a lot in there that I'm happy to talk further about as we move through the podcast.
I'm sure we will indeed. Thank you, Diane. And Chris, let's go to you next.
Well, thanks very much, Chris. I'll try to be commendably short like Diane, except I'm not prone to shortness or brevity, as you'll see. As you mentioned, I'm an Emeritus Professor, which means I've retired from my academic role. My academic role was at 4 universities, Aberystwyth, Cardiff, Oxford and Huddersfield, for those who like to make connections with where they've been in their past. I was for 20 years Professor of Accounting at Huddersfield. Nearly half that time I was Dean of Business and Law. And so you can see that brings quite a lot of experience of higher education. I've also written and researched a lot over the years. So hopefully that qualified for me this role, which is higher and professional education representative. But over the years, I've also done quite a lot with professions. So my experience of insurance is very limited. I bought policies. So some of my hard-earned money has gone that way. But I've worked more with accountants. I've done quite a lot of work with the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales. I was on their Ethics Standards Committee for 10 years, and I'm the architect and main writer of their Ethics Online CPD course, which was launched a couple of years ago. So I've got a general interest in professions and have written on that as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what goes on at the Chartered Insurance Institute and hopefully helping with it.
No doubt you will, Chris. Thank you. And last but by no means least, Neil.
So Neil Freshwater, I'm a qualified actuary. Spent about a third of my career as an actuary, another third as a CFO, and the latter third as a CEO. So I've got well over 30 years experience in insurance. And again, it splits about half and half between the life sector and general insurance across that time. I've worked primarily in the UK and Ireland, but I've also been involved and led global teams. So I've worked around the world on that, including sitting on boards in UK, Ireland, across Europe and North and South America. For me, I'm very proud of the industry that I work in. I'm proud to work in insurance. I'm proud of the purpose of the insurance sector and would like to be part of doing a better job of explaining what that is and why I'm proud of it.
Absolutely. It's a really good point. Thank you, Neil. For our listeners who might not be familiar, we're going to ask our guests what journey they went through in terms of onboarding with the CI and the Professional Standards Committee, so we can hear from them exactly what the role is and the importance to the CI and the wider profession. Perhaps if we start in reverse order and go with you first, Neil.
I think for me, learning more about the CI, I've been a member in the past. I'm also a member of the actuarial profession. I've worked for large companies that have very strong sets of values, ethics, and professional standards. What's interesting for me is where does the CII fit in that? What is our role? I'm interested in all aspects of this. So yes, there is an element of raising standards. There is an element of promoting standards. There is the point around consistency and how we work across the different sectors within insurance and financial planning. But then there's also a piece around how we communicate those standards and build public trust. I think it's so easy to just read the stories of when things go wrong and think that is symptomatic of an industry that doesn't put its customers first. And I think we can do a better job of promoting all the good stories when we've been there for people at their time of need and the standards that support that.
Absolutely. Chris, perhaps you can expand on that a little bit with your, education background.
Yeah, and also I think with some of my writing and thinking and work with professional bodies, so I'm kind of interested in when professional bodies work well and when they don't. As Neil said, individual firms or individuals can do badly or can do well. We tend to hear only about the bad. There are people who are very critical of professions and professional bodies. My take has always been that professional bodies have great potential to contribute to economic and social good, but they need to be maintaining their standards and developing their standards to do so. And they've got to protect that role very carefully, not in a protectionist sense, but in terms of doing the job well. And so I think that the Professional Standards Committee has a really important role in supporting the board and ensuring that the CII manages to do that. So I'm particularly interested in terms of my practical experience, things like codes of ethics. I've advised quite a lot of businesses and professional bodies over the years on codes of ethics and how you implement them and develop them and such like. But I think I'm also interested in just that general thing, which is, well, what does a profession stand for? And I would say, I think there's two pillars, both of which play into this committee's role really importantly. One of which is competence. It's around the skills that you have. But it's also about how you use those skills. So it's about ethics and integrity. I could go to a dentist who may be highly skilled at selling treatment I don't need, for example, or I might go to a very nice ethical dentist who's totally incompetent and ruins my teeth. What we need is those twin pillars. Those are the foundations, if you like, for the whole project that any profession, including the CII, has. I think those twin pillars also work together. So there is an ethical responsibility to be competent, to develop your competence, to know where your competence doesn't go and to get help accordingly. But I also think, given a lot of my work has been on business ethics, particularly in the financial sector, is we sometimes think, or people sometimes think that ethics is about being nice and having a kind of a pleasant attitude and general sense of goodwill toward everyone. But I don't think it really is that. If you look at when things go wrong ethically, it's often not because someone deliberately set out to do something bad. They just didn't notice. And then sometimes they dug themselves into a bigger hole. So one of my big things, which I hope I bring to the committee, is thinking about what it means to be ethically competent, what it means to spot ethical issues, to make a good judgment on those issues, and really carry through the right actions, even when maybe the going gets tough or it's not the most convenient thing to do. So I think ethical competence is often undervalued. I think it sits alongside technical competence. And I'm hoping that in my work with the committee, we can continue to help develop and support that in the profession. But I think there's also just one thing I might say as well. You referred to terms of reference, and there's some new terms of reference or amendments to terms of reference just going through at the moment, where we're also looking at slightly more of a policy role. So I think that it's very important to think long-term and bigger picture. Yes, we have to think about the short-term things, disciplinary measures and things like that. But where are we going in a broader sense? And where does the profession sit within the broader economy and society? And hopefully we'll do some useful, practical thinking about that in the days to come.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. And Neil, you've both touched there on the elements of competence, ethical behaviour, public trust. But Diane, moving to you in terms of your onboarding to the committee and the role you play as the independent consumer representative, how do you feel that's gone for you in terms of the importance of the work you'll be doing?
So I think what struck me when I first started reading the papers, Chris, was just how much is going on. There is an extraordinary amount of work going on across the organisation, and really important work. So I think the CII is into year 3 of the 5-year strategy. And importantly, the committee needs to provide the right level of support and challenge to that work underway. And Chris, my role is independent consumer representative, and it's critical that the perspective of the consumer is understood, that their challenges are understood. I think in a moment we're going to talk a bit more about trust in the sector. When we lose trust in the sector, that's when we see underinsurance. That's when we see problems with financial resilience as a result. We have trouble recruiting into the sector because it's not trusted. So trust in the sector, which is a huge part of the committee's objectives, really does matter. It goes beyond just saying it matters. It truly matters. And as the consumer representative, I'm looking forward to bringing that understanding, those insights of what's happening for consumers, what they're facing in their lives, what their decision points are, how pricing affects them, all the things that we need to be really aware of.
Absolutely. Thank you, Diane. I think hearing from the three of you there, it's clear to say that the summary really of the committee is to continue to support professionalism, competence, ethical behaviour, and engender public trust. So all three of you clearly have got work to do in that regard. Moving forwards then, these are new appointments for you all. I guess if we can hear from you all about what motivated you to join the CI's Professional Standards Committee, and particularly if you can maybe highlight any aspects of its work that resonate with your own recent professional values. Neil, let's start with you on that one.
I had some time to think through what I wanted to do for the next sort of 5 or 10 years of my career. I've been in the profession, in the industry for a long time. And I was reflecting on when I joined the insurance industry as a young actuarial trainee in 1990. And the world that I was in then, when you look back, it's very different to what it is now. That the sense of customer was a distant concept. It was very much weighted towards what was in the best interests of the company. And I remember the first real conversations around customer and how that's evolved over the last 15, 20 years. And if I think of the profession and how it's viewed, I'm not sure that the industry has necessarily updated its image in line with how our approach to customer has changed over that period. As I mentioned, I'm proud to work in the insurance sector. I've seen firsthand and been involved in decisions in companies where people are passionate about doing the right thing for the customer, about helping the customer, and about that being the central purpose of what we do, whether that's life insurance, whether it's general insurance, property, cars, you name it. And for me, trying to look at the different aspects of that. So helping to promote professional standards, ethics, values, promote the sector, both for our customers and for future generations of employees, and still look at continually raising standards. I think there's a lot of work to do there. I think there's a gap between perception and reality. And my experience in different companies, in the UK in particular, actually, is that the vast majority of people, when they wake up every day, try and do the right thing every day for their customers and balancing other stakeholders. And occasionally things go wrong and then being judged on how you remediate that. But of course, it's very easy when things do go wrong. That's deeply personal for people and working through that. So for me, the opportunity, having worked in the industry for a long time, having worked around the world, having seen examples of good practice, typically having seen more examples of good practice in the UK than a lot of other countries that I've worked, I think that was a great opportunity to get involved and to bring some of that experience into a committee. You know, I serve as one of the insurance reps on the committee, helping to bring that to life practically and how that will work, bringing in how companies can work to support that or how that works well in companies so that you have got a real consistent approach across the entire industry of different components of that. So that's what really motivated me in terms of wanting to get involved, to bring my experience, to make a difference and to help communicate how that difference is made. And if there's just one thing from my first meeting that I got particularly excited about, it's some of the work we're doing on education and updating the education and the exams and how we can then really promote skills within the industry. And the point made earlier around how skills dovetail with values and behaviours. And I think it's the combination of those that's really powerful for this.
Thank you, Neil. That passion really comes across and still shows the relevance to you as part of your professional career as well. Chris, what about you? What motivated you to join the committee?
I suppose I'm just a step or two further on the career journey than Neil there, because I think I started in 1980 working full-time and 75 working part-time. Obviously, as a child prodigy, I will claim. But I've got to that stage in life where I no longer have a job, but I'm doing quite a lot of work. So I don't want to stop working. And some of that's paid and some of that's unpaid and some of it's academic and some of it's very business focused. And when this opportunity came along, I put it to test with 3 criteria. Really, do I think that the work that this organization does is worthwhile? Implied already, I think professions potentially are extremely positive and useful things in society as one component of making sure the economy in that society work well. So I think there's a great deal of potential there. I'm sure CII is filling much of it already. So I thought it's a good thing to do. And also insurance and financial planning, I think, are important. It's one thing that unites them. It's helping people to deal with uncertainty in the future. And life doesn't seem to be becoming any more certain. Now, we've got to make sure that they're able to access the right products and that they trust that and all that sort of stuff. But potentially, it's a very useful thing to do. And economically, it's a very important thing for the country to do. And perhaps picking up on something that Neil said, I think probably it is underappreciated. Maybe we get more excited about television awards and film awards and footballers and things. But, insurance and financial planning are important. We do them well. And we want to continue to do them well. Second criterion really was, do I think I've got anything to contribute? And as the role was in higher education and professional education, the representative of those, I thought, well, I do have a lot of background in this area as a former university leader and teacher and researcher and writer. I'll offer my services and maybe I can contribute something. I confess there's a more sort of selfish reason as well. It's actually whether I will enjoy the role. And chiefly for me, that means learning still. Does it complement the other things that I know about? Will it prompt me to think more about what I like thinking about? And so I think there'll be a lot of learning experience for me here, not just learning about insurance and financial planning, but learning about the way in which I think about these things in general. The practical issues in these particular sectors will challenge my thinking and probably help it develop. There's other aspects of enjoyment as well in any role, of course, which is meeting new people, getting to know them. And so far, so good, I will say, with Diane and Neil here and yourself too, Chris, but also the other members I met on the committee at the first meeting we've had, and indeed the staff members. It was interesting and good to talk to them and see their commitment to what the CII is doing. So that's how I've ended up in the role.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. And Diane, your motivations, you've mentioned buyers of insurance have a myriad of things to deal with. Is one of your drivers perhaps that you can bring a voice to those of us that are buying insurance and perhaps aren't getting heard anywhere else?
I certainly hope so, Chris. So I spent 5 years in banking, Chris, working, leading the compliance team within my portfolio. And during that time, I saw a lot of examples, or a number of examples across a million customers of where things had gone wrong, where products and services hadn't been understood, where a complaint hadn't been dealt with well, where people were left feeling distraught and distressed about their engagement and didn't really get what they needed out of the product. So a lot of my work has been around financial resilience, particularly in the context of the aging population. And I think it's really important that across a lifetime, people are able to make good, informed decisions with the right level of information, that they have good products available to them that they can make decisions about, that are available, affordable, that they trust the sector. That means they trust that there will be a payout for something if it goes wrong in the way that they understood it would. I've done quite a bit of work with community groups who are underinsured, and there's a whole set of complex reasons for that. But often it was that they felt that it was a waste of money paying, because if they came to claim, their belief was that the provider wouldn't pay, and that was their worldview. Now, that's underinsurance across a number of things. So I do feel quite strongly about this. And through those years in banking and my role as Retirement Commissioner looking at financial resilience in New Zealand and regulatory roles, I do think that we need to ensure that the customer is getting what they paid for and what they need, acknowledging that there's two sides to that. So yeah, really important.
Thank you, Diane. One of our key questions really as new members to the committee is one of the biggest challenges ahead for the profession in terms of upholding professional standards. Diane, we'll start with you. You referenced consumer trust in there, so that's probably going to be at least in the top three, but are there other key challenges you see in terms of upholding professional standards?
I think there's some huge challenges actually, because I think time and bandwidth is an issue. I think for businesses, there is a lot to consider currently. Geopolitical issues, cybercrime, climate change, how AI is emerging and affecting business models and remuneration models, pricing models, and how it's affecting talent. But also we're in a really challenging economic time. And so I think that's a lot to be getting on with. And we've seen quite a bit of regulatory change. And so inevitably the question around professional standards sits in that context of a very, very busy day. The board will have a very busy board pack and agenda. So I think it's really important that the value of professional standards is really understood, but also that it is clear, achievable, and workable within the framework and objectives of the business. That really matters. It has to be pragmatic and practical. So I think there are huge challenges, actually. Inevitably training. In my banking days, we did a lot around frontline training across, say, 5,000 staff. You might have the best of intentions of business, but that has to be rolled out in a way that works across the whole employee base. So I do think there's huge challenges, and I think we've got our work cut out for us in continuing to explain why this matters. And I think, to Chris's point earlier, it's not anyone wakes up in the morning and says professional standards don't matter. I don't think that's what happens. I think sometimes they get squeezed in amongst all the objectives and agendas for their business.
Absolutely. And you mentioned time and bandwidth. I think that's a really valid point that firms have got a lot to do. Neil, from the insurance industry representative, do you agree with Diane on that front? The time and bandwidth element, all the challenges?
If I think of the companies I've worked in the last 15, 20 years, they've been larger insurance companies. And the objectives of the CII on professional standards are completely and utterly aligned with the values and behaviours of the companies. And I think this is certainly true of large companies. Similarly, if I look at my professional responsibilities as an actuary, there's complete alignment. So I think one of the questions for me coming into this role is how do we make sure that we align without duplicating from a time and effort point of view so that I don't have to do CPD or training that goes across the two of those. So I would like to think that there is some common ground on that. One of the things I'm hoping to learn through this is what that looks like across the entire landscape of the insurance sector, all the different players in that. Is my own experience, is that consistent across other players, other companies? So I think that's interesting. To some of the other points that Diana raised, I couldn't agree more. Point around trust is critical to all of this, and making sure that the perception that people like me have who are often setting standards and involved at a relatively high level, making sure that that perception that we have for the tone that we think we're setting is the same as the reality on the ground for the people who are receiving those services, the people who are putting their claims in to the company, so that we have more and more proof points of when people need us, we're there for them. To point around a sadly widely held, or certainly more widely held belief than we would all like, that people believe that we're there not to pay claims, as opposed to everything I see in every conversation, every executive meeting I'm in about our job is to pay valid claims. So I think that trust and that perception, and making sure the perception and the reality are aligned, I think is really, really important. And I think that's just getting harder. Diane mentioned a few other areas where people get their information from. So the sources of the truth are as much of an issue for us as they are for anybody else. And think about how we reach out and how we communicate with our customers and our changing customers' needs, and how we get across the message about what's important to us, what's important in terms of how we treat our customers and how central the customers are to our business. I think we have to evolve in how we build that trust.
Thank you both. There was a mention there around the public getting access to information. So, supporting the priority there around public trust. Diane, in your experience that you touched on there from a consumer perspective, how important do you think it is the size of the firm that customers are going to? Do you think that plays a big impact in quality or level of advice consumers receive?
It certainly shouldn't do, should it? It should be irrelevant. What I would say, though, on the communication is I'm not sure the sector is always that great at communicating. Sometimes communications can be opaque and very hard to fathom. And then I think what people do is they disconnect. They think, well, I can't understand this. This isn't for people like me, so I'll muddle through. So they tend not to ask questions because they lose confidence in their ability. They don't want to look stupid. And so they don't tend to really fully understand some of the decisions of what they're buying. And I think great communication matters. And I don't think it's that hard. I think we need to lose a lot of the jargon and remember that while we live and breathe this stuff, most people don't. And most people have very busy days. They've got a lot on. They're worried about their mortgage and their marriage and their weight and their health and everything in between. So it needs to be simple, straightforward.
Absolutely simple and straightforward. Moving on, in terms of your roles as committee members, perhaps we can get one key thing that you hope to achieve as a member of the committee moving forwards. Chris, perhaps you'd like to go first.
Well, I think given my particular position on the committee in terms of higher and professional education representative, I think one of the things I'd like to do is perhaps bring to the committee a perspective which looks at a particular sort of bigger picture, which is to do with how we develop a profession over time in terms of both its technical competence, but also in terms of its values-based behaviour, and how that's not a one-off thing that you do when you pass some exams. I think it's very important that a professional body is not seen by its member as simply a ticket, maybe like an MBA, if I go back to what I used to teach, to a higher salary, but it's something that you join. And I think it's very interesting the language we use. We talk about members, which of course is a limb of a body, and we talk about professional bodies. You're not just someone with a piece of paper, but you're someone who's a member of a body. And to some extent, to use a metaphor sometimes used in other contexts, you've joined a ship, which you are then responsible for helping to repair and steer over time as you chart the choppy seas that Diane was kind of referring to, with all the difficult things that we're seeing around us. But in a sense, your journey is fundamentally the same. It's about being a good professional. What are we about? Well, we're about being a good professional body, and we're about doing certain kinds of things on which we have expertise and others don't. And that's the nub of the trust problem, really, because we have expertise, or members have expertise, in an area which, as Dan was saying, people aren't inclined to look at because they're busy. But who would? I mean, what kind of person would educate themselves on insurance products, for example, when they didn't absolutely need to? It's not something that turns people on. It's very difficult because the things that are being sold, financial planning advice and insurance products, even after you bought them, you don't know whether you bought a good one. Someone might recommend go to a restaurant. And you think, well, I don't think it's any good. I'll go Trustpilot, TripAdvisor, I'll go along. It was rubbish. I'm not going there again. We put money into insurance policies. We put money into pensions funds. And we don't know until years later, if ever, whether what we were doing each year was sensible or not. It's what economists call a credence good. We just have to kind of believe that the advice we've been given, the product we bought, are good. And I think that's kind of a standing challenge for the profession. Trust is even more important in those circumstances, but how do you engender it when, in a sense, a lot of the issues are quite technical and it's not something that people want to brief themselves on much? So do they like paying for financial advice? No, they don't. Do they want to spend time educating themselves about these things? Not really. So that's where I kind of think one of the standing challenges for us is how we ensure this trustworthiness on the part of the profession, which is then perceived by people so they trust the profession and that trust is well placed.
Thank you, Chris. Neil and Diane.
Happy to come in. So for me, it's bringing that perspective of being in the industry for a long time, the experience, but also noting that we're all customers of the industry too, and we'll have had our own experiences, and some of those might not be perfect. But for me, it's around understanding, increasing the relevance, the impact and the prominence of the CI, and particularly the professional standards that we all stand for. And then selfishly taking that back into my day role to help to advocate for the CIO and what we do professionally through my networks as well. I hope there's a virtuous circle there from my perspective.
Diane, is there one key thing that you're hoping to achieve with your membership of the committee?
I've got quite a broad background spanning a number of sectors, so I'm hoping that breadth will help. I grew up in Hounslow, but I've worked across multiple jurisdictions, so I think I'm hoping that international perspective will help. And then certainly the customer lens. You know, one of my big questions at the moment for the sector is how will digitalization serve the sector, but also serve the customer? So very quickly, you know, we have an automated phone tree that an 85-year-old struggles to navigate and ends up in the wrong place trying to buy a product online and getting the wrong product. So how can the sector continue to innovate, be more efficient, utilize new tools and technologies, but not leave the customer behind as that change happens? So that's probably it. Breadth, international and customer focus.
Lovely. Well, thanks everyone for joining me on the podcast today. If listeners wish to find out any more about the committee or get in touch, they can visit the CII website and search for Professional Standards Committee. Thank you for listening to this episode of the PFP podcast. You can find useful links in the show notes and related articles on the PFP website, along with further podcasts. Please like, review and subscribe. Until next time, goodbye.